and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name is Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, I'm diving into a question that sits right at the fault line between love and our erotic identities. Something that, if you've lived it, you know can feel quietly heartbreaking. But before we get into all of that today, I want to take a real pause here and say thank you to all of you. Because of all of you, whether you've been listening since the beginning or you just kind of found my show last week, as of today, the Kink Perspective has now surpassed 50,000 downloads. And that's not a number I take for granted. I'm really grateful for every one of you that has showed up, shared the episodes, listened, streamed, downloaded, commented, left a review, all of it, right? You've reached out with your stories. So from me to all of you, thank you. And no matter where you are in the world, I do hear you. And I do my best to acknowledge all of that. But if you are new here, welcome. This space is all about speaking plainly about kink, trauma, identity, psychology, power, and how we navigate relationships that don't always fit the mold. And if you're someone who's asked me on occasion, how do I support the show? There is a donation link in this show's description. It does help me keep the show going and tells me that, we're talking about things that matter here to all of us. And every bit is appreciated and none of it is expected. Now, let's get into today's topic. Can love survive when your erotic identities don't align? What happens when you're kinky and you're in love with someone who isn't? Or you're vanilla and the person you love wants something you don't understand? Or maybe can't give. This really isn't that rare. In fact, it happens a lot more than people think. And when it does, most folks don't talk about it. They sit with it. They try to fix it quietly. They hope that love will be enough. But under the surface, there's grief, there's longing, and there's the growing fear that maybe wanting what you want is going to cost you the entire relationship. And that's what we're going to unpack today. And I want to say that this was stirred by a question from a person that I never expected in a place I didn't know much about. Of all places, this comes from the Middle East, and more specifically, the country Pakistan. And I want to thank this person for having this discussion with me, opening up and sharing a little bit with me, and hopefully my answers gave you some understanding. But today I wanted to take this conversation to the world because I think a lot more of you wrestle with this topic, or there are people who are going to wrestle with it or have wrestled with it and don't know how to navigate it. So let's really start here with talking about the emotional dilemma of this all, right? Let's start with what this actually feels like, because it's easy to say we just want different things in the bedroom, but that doesn't really capture the emotional gravity of it. When your erotic identity, especially the one rooted in kink, isn't met or understood by the person you love, the impact runs a lot deeper than an unmet fantasy. It affects how you show up, how you trust, and even how you're seen. Now, this isn't just a matter of preference. It's about what happens to a person psychologically and emotionally when a core part of who they are lives in exile inside of the very relationship that's supposed to feel like home. So let's talk about that internal split, the slow ache of watching someone try without desire, and why this kind of mismatch cuts differently inside of our lifestyle. Now, first here we have this whole, I said this a moment ago, this internal split. So what do you mean, Chris? I'm talking about emotional fulfillment versus our sexual identities. Now, there's a specific kind of heartbreak that comes when you love someone who can't meet you where your desire lives. It's not the heartbreak of conflict or betrayal. It's quieter. It's more conflicted. Because nothing's technically wrong, at least not on the surface. You care about each other. You're connected in all these other great ways. Maybe life goals, hobbies, whatever, friends. But when it comes to intimacy, to the part that longs to be led or to lead, or to be known in that primal charged erotic way, it's like you're knocking on a door that never really fully opens. And this isn't just about sex. It's about our identity. It's about psychological safety. And for many people, especially in kink, desire is not a recreational part of life. It's where they feel most present, most regulated, most alive. The intimacy in kink often becomes a primary emotional language, right? We begin to shift. We see how we talk and what we say means more to us. So when you've partnered with someone who doesn't speak that language, even if they love you deeply, a split starts to form. One part of you keeps showing up as the devoted, grateful, loving partner, and the other parts start to go quiet. They tuck themselves away. They wait for air. They want to come up to breathe. And the longer you live in that gap, the more the split deepens. It shows up in the form of self-doubt or late-night loneliness or shame of wanting more. And that's not just relational stress. That's psychological dissonance. The cost of living in a relationship where your body and your heart aren't even getting to speak in unison. And then there's this whole pain of watching someone try without resonance, right? This becomes the complexity of having a partner who tries. This is where it gets even more emotionally complicated because they're not indifferent. They care. They're making an effort, but their body tells the truth. Their voice lacks the conviction that we need. Their energy feels tentative or flat. And you know what? You feel it. Not just in the moment, but in your nervous system. Kink requires presence and attunement. And here's the big one, everyone. Desire. When it's not mutual, it lands like a stage performance. And that's not just disappointing to us. It can feel quietly devastating. Now, psychologically here, this sets off a tension between gratitude and grief. And you know they're doing it for you. And maybe you tell yourself that you should be enough. But kink, when it's real, it's about a co-created intensity. It's about being wanted, not accommodated. So even as they go through the motions, you might find yourself feeling more alone because you're not just asking for the act. You're asking for the wanting behind the act. And that's where resonance lives. And when the resonance is missing, the whole structure becomes hollow. This is the kind of effort that leads to slow emotional withdrawal. You smile, you say thank you, you appreciate the gesture, but inside, something contracts, we shrink. Because what you're truly craving isn't compliance, it's desire. So why does this hit harder in the lifestyle than any other mismatch? Because mismatched libidos here or desire happens in all kinds of relationships. It's not exclusive just to kink. It happens across the board. But for us, in a lifestyle, I think it hits differently and it hits deeper because the lifestyle often ties directly into how a person bonds emotionally. For submissives, being owned or guided is what allows their nervous systems to settle. It's where they feel safe. It's where they feel most known. And for dominants, stepping into control is what brings clarity and regulation and meaning. These aren't optional traits. They're organizing forces in a person's psychological and emotional makeup. So when that part of the self goes unmet, it's not just about frustration or sexual lack. It's a destabilization of identity. And there's a reason many kinky people describe their dynamic as spiritual or grounding or emotionally anchoring. Take that away, and you're not just removing sex. You're removing the channel through which trust and vulnerability and safety flow for many of us. And this is why so many people in these mismatched relationships feel emotionally depleted, even when they're thinking and on the outside, everything looks fine. Because something vital is missing for us. Not decorative, not extra, vital. You can love someone with your entire heart, your entire being, and still slowly disappear inside of that love if it asks you to amputate what you are trying to keep inside of it. So you reach across the crossroads, maybe you suppress this part of yourself to preserve the relationship or risk the relationship in order to stay whole. And that's the real dilemma. Not about whether kink matters, but about whether you can live with the cost of burying it. Right? And this is where we start to get in this whole performative dynamics part. Let's say your partner here tries. You've explained your needs. You've been honest about what turns you on, what matters to you, how you want to feel, and they're open enough to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to give this a shot. For you, for me, for us. Now, at first, that's going to feel like a little bit of a relief. Maybe even a small victory here, right? A small win. Proof that love can stretch. That maybe this is going to work. But then something shifts. Maybe it's in the way that they hesitate before touching you. Maybe it's the awkward tone in their voice when they say something meant to be dominant. Maybe they're technically doing everything right. But you feel more alone in that moment than if they just said no. So why is performance without desire, and how does it create more harm than good? When a new partner mimics kink without genuine desire or conviction behind it, it doesn't just fall flat. It can create emotional harm for us because kink is not about following a script. It's about our energy, our charge, our psychological and emotional connection. Why, when those things aren't present, the act alone becomes hollow. And in that hollowness, a new kind of loneliness shows up for us. One that says, you're trying to love me, but you don't see me. This kind of dynamic can lead to this whole internal confusion. You might start wondering if you're asking for too much, if your needs are the problem. Maybe you should, just be grateful for what you have. But those thoughts, they aren't signs of compromise. They're signs of emotional detachment here. Because deep down, your nervous system knows this isn't mutual, this isn't safe, and this isn't real. It's not about them being a bad person or a bad partner. It's about the dissonance that arises when the external gesture doesn't match the internal drive for us. And when it comes to kink, that dissonance is often more painful than just the simple rejection. So what do we do, and how does guilt and resentment and pity seep into all of this? Well, that's where, this whole emotional fallout starts. You might feel guilty for wanting more, guilty for not being satisfied with what they're offering you. Maybe they start to pull away emotionally, not out of cruelty, but because deep down they feel like they're failing you. That can curdle into resentment, and for some, it even becomes pity. They see you struggling with unmet needs and they try harder, but with each attempt, they feel more disconnected from who you are and what the relationship represents. These aren't signs of bad intent. They're signs of a dynamic built on emotional strain. And when one person is performing and the other one is pretending it's enough, both end up emotionally exiled. Not always visible, but subtly, quietly, until communication becomes brittle and trust starts to crack. And really here, from the psychological side of this all, the dynamic becomes unsustainable. People don't just burn out from the effort. They burn out from pretending that the effort is connection. And when erotic effort is met with emotional strain instead of reward, people start avoiding intimacy altogether. So where is the whole difference between the effort and the alignment here? Now, effort is important. I talk about effort all the time. If you don't show up in life with effort, go to work with effort, talk to your family with effort, do anything with effort, it shows. It shows in care. It shows in willingness. But effort alone does not create erotic compatibility. Alignment is about a shared turn-on, shared rhythms, and a mutual payoff, right? Especially emotional. And in a lifestyle, that payoff comes from resonance. From the moment when one person's desire lights up something in the other, when you're actually in it together. And without that alignment, effort feels like performance here, like checking off a box on a list of things you need to keep the relationship afloat. And that's not erotic, that's just exhausting. And this is why some people in relationships end up feeling emotionally numb, because they've spent so long trying to be moved by something that just isn't landing, or wanting for their partner to change, to awaken, to shift into something or someone who wants it to. But the truth is here, if it's not in them, it won't come from them. And no amount of love or effort can force that into existence. We can't will it to be true. So this is where this whole hope and for the conversation begins. It's very natural for us to hope, especially when you're in love with someone who treats you well, who's open-minded, who wants to understand. So you think maybe over time they're going to grow into this. Maybe they'll just haven't really had the right experience yet. Maybe once they see how much it means to me, something in them is going to shift. They'll go learn, they're going to train, they're going to go to classes with me. And that's the hope. That love, patience, and exposure will eventually unlock a shared erotic language. And sometimes that does happen. But more often, it doesn't. And that's where the pain comes in. And this is why becomes common and a dangerous trap for many people. The idea that someone can be converted into kink is rooted in good intentions but unrealistic expectations. People fall into this trap because they want to believe that deep emotional connection will lead to sexual alignment somehow. It's comforting. It really does keep us from facing the harder truth that love doesn't always awaken desire, especially if that desire was never part of them to begin with. From a psychological standpoint, this becomes a form of bargaining with them, with ourselves. You're not just waiting. You're investing in the hope that your presence, your clarity, your consistency will be the thing that tips them into your world. But underneath that hope is truly a kind of denial. It's not malicious, just deeply human. We don't want to lose what we love, so we stretch, we bend, we explain, and then we wait. The danger isn't in the waiting itself. It's in how much of yourself gets put on hold in that process. And this is where we start looking now at the dominance and submission as orientation, not technique. Because here's the thing that doesn't get said enough. Dominance and submission aren't just roles. They're not costumes you put on or skills you learned from a checklist. For many people, they're orientations. I orient that way. Me, myself, Chris, I identify as a sadist and a dominant because it's something that's part of my life. It's been part of my life longer than I've been doing therapy, right? It's part of my orientation. And that means it has to come from somewhere deeper, something wired into the way you bond, communicate, and experience intimacy. You can teach someone to spank, to use a title, to follow a protocol, but you can't teach someone to want it, to desire it, to feel it, right? To let them for it, like for us, I'm sorry, like I'm trying to describe this to you guys, and I wish you could see me, like I'm trying to pull this out of me. My dominance, that sadism, it lives inside of me, and I relish it, right? We can't teach that to someone, right? And that's the difference. When the desire isn't mutual, kink becomes mechanical. It feels like cosplay instead of connection, and over time that erodes not just arousal, but respect. Because what you want starts to feel misunderstood, or worse, reduced to a set of tasks. And there's nothing wrong with being dominant. There's nothing wrong with being submissive. But trying to coax one out of someone who doesn't feel it creates emotional distortion on both sides. It becomes a performance. And let me be honest here, no one thrives in that for long. Not at all, and in nothing I've ever seen. Not in all the stories I've heard or the people I've talked to. Because this is where hope versus denial, and you start asking yourself, how long do you wait? So how do you know the difference between holding space for growth and denying what's already clear? This is where self-honesty really matters. Are you seeing small signs of real interest and real curiosity, and more so real turn-on? Or are you seeing effort paired with discomfort and confusion and disconnection? Are you building something slowly, or are you carrying it alone while telling yourself it's mutual? Now, there's no exact timeline, but there is a tipping point where hope starts to cost you more than it feeds you, where every month that passes feels like one more inch of yourself that you've put back in the dark, waiting for someone else to turn on the light. If that sounds familiar, you're not broken, not for wanting it to work, but you owe it to yourself to ask, if nothing changes from this point, from here, could I live with that? And let me tell you, I've been at this crossroad. I was at this crossroad a long time ago in my life when I first entered kink, and years before I joined the military, I was with somebody and something happened, and I found myself at that crossroad. And I stepped back and I took some time for myself to answer that question. Right? It's a hard question. But we want to make sure that we're looking at all of this and we're not doing suppression or self-abandonment, because there is a point that this kind of relationship where the conversation shifts from will they change to can I live without this part of myself? And for a lot of people, that question doesn't get answered directly. Instead, they just start to go quiet. They downplay their fantasies. They stop bringing things up. They try to be happy with what's available, grateful for what's good, and they tell themselves that's enough, that maybe they can learn to live without the rest. And living between who you are and who your partner can love. But that's where the split begins, the psychological divide between who you really are at your core and who you believe your partner is capable of loving. You showing up in the relationship as an acceptable version of yourself, that's a palatable one. We can swallow that. The one who's toned it down, made it easier, more digestible. And you start to edit yourself, not just in behavior, but in an identity. You leave pieces of yourself at the door before coming home. And after a while, you forget what it felt like to walk in fully as who you are. That kind of internal divide has a cost to all of us, not just denial, because you're no longer being rejected outright, but you're not being fully received either. And your part of yourself is rejecting your own identity. And that limbo creates a slow, grinding disconnection from yourself. You're in a relationship, but you're not in it, not fully, because the part of you that feels most alive, most real, most intimate is locked away in silence. And sometimes this leads us to other things, emotional numbness, disconnection, and sometimes even infidelity. And let's be realistic, eventually something does give. Maybe you do cheat. Maybe it's not physically, but emotionally. Maybe you start living in fantasies, scrolling through content that scratches the right itch. Maybe you flirt with someone who actually gets it just to feel seen again. Or maybe you don't cheat at all. You just go numb. You stop wanting sex altogether. You stop asking for anything. You lower your expectations so far that wanting starts to feel like a burden. This isn't just about unmet desire. It's about emotional starvation. And the behaviors that follow aren't moral failures. They're signs of a person trying to stay connected to themselves while being stretched too far from who they are. Now, what do we call this? In psychology, we call this self-abandonment, the quiet act of turning away from your own needs over and over until you forget they ever mattered. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, and it shows up in a lot of small ways: fatigue, irritability, feeling distant from your own body, questioning your own worth. But over time, those small signals add up to something bigger: disconnection from your own life. And suppression isn't sacrifice, it's erosion. There's this myth that we're taught, especially in long-term relationships, that suppressing our desires is part of being a good partner, and that cannot be further from the truth. That's not evolution of a relationship, that's denial of it. That's the destruction, quiet destruction of it. Because that compromise means shrinking, that love means learning to go without, but suppression isn't sacrifice, it's erosion. Sacrifice is conscious. It's chosen, it comes with mutual awareness, and often a shared reward. Suppression isn't silent. It happens under the surface, and what it takes isn't obvious until something is vital really is already missing for us. If you're constantly managing your needs so they don't inconvenience your partner, that's not compromise, that's disappearance. And disappearing inside of a relationship is one of the loneliest places a person can live. The longer you suppress, the harder it becomes to remember what you even needed in the first place. You start telling yourself it was never that important. You minimize, you rationalize. And before you know it, you built a life around being tolerable than being true. That's not sustainable. Not for anyone. So can it work? And that's the real question at the center of this. Chris, can it work? Is there a way to step in a loving relationship with someone who doesn't share your erotic wiring? Can you build a life together even if they don't want what you want in the bedroom or the power dynamic that your body and mind crave? Sometimes, I'm going to be honest, sometimes, yeah. But only if the terms are truly clear and only if the reality is faced head on. Now, there are cases where open dynamics and creative structure can make room. There are relationships where kink and non-kink partners find a way forward. Maybe it's partial openness where kink lives outside the relationship and emotional intimacy remains central at home. Maybe it's a creative structure like a non-sexual DS bond that lives alongside a traditional marriage. Some people negotiate what they call parallel truths, where they honor their connection while also respecting their individual needs, even if that means stepping outside of monogamy. Now, I only suggest this not because I'm against anything, but sometimes we need that reality, right? We maybe date someone. Let me take this to a bigger side. What if we date someone and we're in love with somebody or whatever the case may be? We are into sports. We play sports, but they hate sports. They don't like sports. They're not going to be convinced of it, even if they want to cheer us on. Does that mean we stop playing? No. What we have to do is figure out how do we negotiate with them and communicate with them about our desire to do this, right? But no matter what, those setups only work when both of you can speak plainly, tolerate the discomfort, and stop pretending that compromise means everyone's just going to be happy. It works when there's trust, not performance. When there's clarity, not silent grief. So, a core question to ask, can you separate love from your identity? And what's the emotional cost? And this is where you get honest with yourself. Can you live a full emotional and sexual life without this part of you being touched, fed, or seen? Can you separate love from identity? And if you try to, what does it cost you? Because the truth is, sometimes the person you love deeply is not someone that can meet your erotic self. That doesn't mean they're wrong. It doesn't mean you're wrong. But it does mean that the foundation of the relationship has a structural gap. And if you're the only one building bridges to cross it, you're going to collapse, right? Just from the effort eventually. If there's an emotional cost and it's chronic loneliness, disconnection from yourself, or a relationship that feels more like a role you're performing than a life you're choosing, that's not a compromise. That's a slow exit from yourself. And what honest compromise looks like versus a quiet desperation here? When we talk about what does a healthy compromise actually look like, it's conscious, it's chosen, it's mutual. It's the difference between saying, I'm making peace with this and I feel good about what we're building versus I'm pretending this is fine because I don't want to lose them. Compromise is when both people adjust their expectations with clarity and consent. Desperation is when one person keeps adjusting while the other one just receives. You can survive without being erotically matched, but can you thrive? Can you love and be loved without having to mute the part of you that feels most awake, most grounded, most alive? That's the question you take with you, not to scare yourself, but to center yourself, because the real answer isn't about whether the relationship can survive. It's about whether you can, in the version of yourself you've been asked to live with. Now, if you're asking whether to suppress part of yourself or to keep a relationship alive, in order to keep a relationship alive, then somewhere inside you already know the answer. That question doesn't come from curiosity. It comes from conflict, from the quiet part of you asking for permission to stop disappearing. Love matters. It does, and I know it does. But so does alignment. Wanting to be loved and wanting to be desired in the same way You were built to connect. That's not greedy, that's human. There's nothing selfish about wanting your emotional life and your erotic self to belong in the same relationship. Some people can live with the gap between those things, others can't. The only real mistake is pretending you're the one kind of person when you're the other, right? What do I mean? That you can do both and then you can suppress the other. It's never really gonna work. At least not that I've seen. I'm not saying there aren't exceptions, but remember those are exceptions, right? And if I was wrong here, you disagree, that's fine. I knew somebody who knew someone, or I did this 15 years ago. That's great. But as we get older, the things we like, enjoy, and do become part of our identity and become harder to change about ourselves because that's where we relate, right? So here's the question I'm going to leave you with today. What would it cost you to keep making this work exactly like it is? Now, that's a question that most people avoid, but it's the one that tells you really everything. A couple of things I want to mention here at the end of the show. This week I've been invited. I don't know when it's going to come out. I'll find out. I'm going to be on the Authentically Kinky podcast. I'm going to do that on Thursday. I'm going to record. I was invited over something I wrote. So I'm going to go on there and give some views. I will put that out. I'm really looking forward to that. I'm going to be honest, I'm a little bit nervous, right? I typically don't mind interviewing others, but, I'm not big on actually when it gets into myself too much. Surprisingly. I think some of you are like, we know a lot. You don't. I'm quite a private person. There's a lot of reasons for that. But I'm excited to do that. I'll find out when it's coming. I'll put that out on my socials. Substack, yes, I'm getting this question quite a bit. How can I follow you there? Anybody can follow me on Substack, and that link's already in every show that I do. However, there are articles I do there. I do at least 2 a week that are for paid people. And you have to understand, because, look, I've got to support myself. All of this work that I do takes time and it costs me money. And I'm sorry, like I can't give that away for free, right? Maybe I think after about 6 months a paid article's been out, I do put it out, but I really, you have to understand, guys, I do a lot. I write, there is free takeaways on my website, free worksheets for the lifestyle. I think I got about 7. I'm going to be doing another one here. I don't ask you for any of that. So I do want to say, if you want to support my work, great. And I totally appreciate it. But please limit asking me for more free things, because I already contribute a lot. I'm not saying I'm not grateful for those who do, but you have to understand that even I have an emotional limit, right? I can only give so much of myself because it's draining. I also want to talk about something else real quick, my AMA. I've only recently turned it on, I think in about the last 2 weeks. I don't even remember. This all started because a friend of mine I haven't talked to in a while, Sid, I don't know if you're out there and you're listening. You need to make contact, buddy. Haven't heard from you in a while. A friend of mine bought me a subscription on Fetlife. It was totally like a passing joke. He did it. I've been ever thankful. For the past couple months, I haven't turned it on. I turned on the AMA. So a couple things I want to address there real quick. Number one, I don't mind explaining things to the best I can. I will not offer therapeutic advice. I don't do that. No therapist should be doing that online at all, ever, right? We are not allowed to do that. We cannot give you therapeutic advice online. I will answer general questions and statements. If you are asking me personal questions about my life, I will not answer them, right? Because I separate my professional and personal life, right? And I would ask that you respect that. If you want to ask some general things like, maybe places I've been in the world or places I played or, where I'm originally from the States, I'll tell you all, that I'm from California originally, but I have lived all over the country and all around the world. But can we just kind of leave the more invasive questions that I'm getting out of it, please, right? And even the questions I receive on my show, I'd appreciate that too, right? Just a little bit of mutual respect. Also, I'm going to address this again, although I talked about it last week, but it really needs to be said again. So, kink, therapy, and BDSM. It can't be done. I'm sorry. There is no modality. There is this person right now in New York. I have talked about them before. The person made a post about it on social media a couple days ago. Quite honestly, anybody telling you they can treat, and I'm actually seeing this out of Texas. I'm seeing it in Colorado. There's a couple places. I cannot believe it. But they're advertising that they can heal your trauma through BDSM. No, they cannot. It doesn't exist. There's no modality. It's completely illegal. If you've got a dom offering you that type of healing and saying they're trauma informed and they can beat it out of you, they're wrong. I don't care what they want to argue with me. I have argued with this person in the past. You're wrong. You're dangerous. And you're lucky that I don't have it in my time right now to probably report you to the state that you're in. Right? I'm just going to leave it at that. It's not going to be any more targeted. Stop doing it. Stop telling people you can cure their OCD and their other issues through your weird mysticism and stuff. It's totally a lie. And I'm only reiterating this, probably going to be one for the last times, because this creates harm, emotional and mental harm, when people go seeking this. And then they'll come and talk to me about it. And then I'm kind of at the point that you should be very wary of this. I think this person probably preys on new people. I really don't know. Look, I get you want to brand yourself. That's fine. But do it in a way that you're not crossing two different worlds. I don't. Please don't do it. Anyway, finally, my outro here. Now that I've kind of rambled for a bit, I apologize. I do have a book, right? It's not the greatest book. It's my first book. Tangled Desires, the exploration of BDSM and psychology. Wherever you can download a book, or wherever you want a print version of it, it does exist. Look, I wrote the book a few years ago, and prior to that, I actually was writing the book for quite a while. And I did what a lot of first-time people do. I overextended myself. Like, I put everything in I thought you all wanted to hear. I get it. The feedback hasn't been the greatest. One person cared for it. But look, I know it's a bit repetitive, but I wrote it from a good place. And if I ever write another book again, I've learned a lot. But guys got to remember, I self-published. I wrote it. Didn't have anybody to help check it for me. So it's hard. It's not easy. So, if you think that it sucks, that's fine. But then I encourage you to go and do your own book and then put it out there for review, right? So, and I joke about my book all the time. I'll probably joke about it this upcoming Thursday. Anyway, I still need to get Red Warrior. I've got somebody else in the Middle East I do want to talk to, because there's a lot more questions, guys. The world, be curious about the BDSM world, right? Our communities are still rather small. Talk to these people. Help them if they've got general questions, because the privilege to live openly and freely in places like Canada, the United States, the UK, Australia, Singapore, even, places like that. There are other countries around the world. They can't do that freely. That they're quiet and they're secret. Help them out, right? That's my be kind for the day. All right. So, questions, comments on this thing. Tell me what you think. I want to hear more of the engagement. And to the person who sent me this and who I've been talking to for a bit, I hope this helps a little bit more. Until next time, everybody, be safe and stay kinky.